Okay, got the hand-wired Tram D201 all finished up here. Everything's back together except the cabinets. Still have to put the end caps, which I always take off before I start working on them so they don't get damaged, and the top and bottom covers, but everything else is done. All the electrolytic capacitors changed, the resistors. From the top side now you can see the new can caps that are installed. The factories would have been a multi-section 10 microfarad and a multi-section 40 microfarad. I upgrade those so it's now a multi-section 50 microfarad and a multi-section 100 microfarad. Other than that, the only other things that were changed up here on the top are the electrolytic capacitors, the little small radials on the balanced modulator board. Of course, everything was cleaned up here in the board. All the dust bunnies were moved. One vacuum tube was changed. That's this one. They were all tested on a Westmore 501, which is just a GSA contracted triplet 3444 laboratory mutual conductance tube tester. All the tubes tested in very good condition. This one was a little bit low, but that's not the reason I changed it. The reason I changed it was originally someone had installed a 6BQ7 in this position. It should be a 6BK7. There is another 6BQ7 in this radio that's right here. The reason you don't want to use a 6BQ7 is it's basically they're pretty much universal. They're the same tube, except the 6BK7 is a higher amplification. So by installing the 6BQ7 in here, this is the part of your receiver IF amplifier. By having the lower amplification tube in here, it's not going to do just that. It's not going to amplify as much. So I installed a new one here. It looks like all of the tubes except for one. I think it was this one right here. This one's still an original Tram. All of the other tubes at one point in time or another have been changed. So most of them, they're either RCAs like these, or your audio modulation tubes, 6L6, and final tube there, Sylvania's, Sylvania here, Sylvania down here. Most of those are all RCAs, and there's one, or is it right here? This is a GE. But they're all in excellent condition, so no need to change those. The only other thing that was changed up here on top is this capacitor right here. That's your DC blocking capacitor. It was fine, but the reason I changed these is I upgrade them. This capacitor is in between your RF final tube and your coax connector. So what this does is, on one side it has the same, when you're transmitting, it has the same DC voltage, the high voltage that this tube's getting. You don't want that going out to your antenna. You only want your RF signal, which is AC, which this capacitor passes. So that's why it's called a DC blocking capacitor. It blocks the DC component from making it out to your coax. So, worst case scenario, it shorts out, that can happen. If it shorts out, then you have that high DC voltage going out. Could damage meters or anything else you might have attached in line. Or worst case scenario would be you happen to be touching something and you get either the snot zapped out of you, or God forbid, kills you. So the original is actually down here. And come on, camera, focus. You can see it was a 1000-volt DC capacitor. It's a 0.001 microfarad. So I installed the same value, 0.001 microfarad, but the one that I install is 1600 volt. So it's a higher voltage, so just better safe than sorry. It never hurts to have higher voltage rated capacitors. Same thing when I do electrolytics. Every electrolytic I installed in here is a higher voltage than what was taken out. These were 450 volt, they're now 500s, so something that doesn't hurt. But the alignment's been done. Didn't have to change any crystals in this. All the crystals came into calibration just fine. Let's see, that's really about it. Final tube's been neutralized. Of course, that's part of the alignment, but I always check that. So everything's good to go on this. The manual clarifier, customer had asked me to check, and if it was unlocked, and it was already unlocked. So all you have to do to transmit is switch your manual control crystal manual selector switch over to manual, and whatever you see on the dial, you'll receive and transmit on that channel. So that's already been taken care of by somebody else. The other modification that you're aware of was already in the radio is somebody repurposed the calibration switch to dual power levels. So now they originally had, if you remember in the previous video, I showed those two resistors that you can bypass to increase your final output, your RF output power, which I don't recommend bypassing both of them. So what I did was I only bypassed one of those resistors. So this switch still does the same thing. Matter of fact, key the microphone with the button in and then button out. Matter of fact, yeah. So there's with the button out and with the button in. So you have a low and a high power setting. So, and of course when you're in the higher power, you'll also have an AM. Now it's only for AM. That has, those resistors have nothing to do with sideband. The circuits run different in that, so that's just your AMs. But that's one way to either raise or lower your dead key power. So if you're running an amplifier, you can just leave the button pushed in for a lower dead key. If you're running a low drive amp, and then if you want to run, let's say, just the radio barefoot, you could, pull that button out, and then you'll have a higher dead key and modulation. Because, like I say, that circuit, those resistors only come into play in the AM because they're actually in series with your modulation transform. If you remember, also in the previous video where I showed those resistors are right before the modulation transformer, before it comes up through the neutralization link over to the final tube. So it's like I say, this is an extremely clean radio. I mean, as far as cosmetics go, there is a tiny little minor scratch on this one knob bright. Other than that, it's perfect. The faceplate's in mint condition. All of the other knob brights are absolutely perfect. Interior's fairly clean. Like I say, it's obviously had some use because most of the tubes have been changed. The resistors that were burned up and cooked on the bottom, but all that's been taken care of. So radio should be good to go for a couple more decades. So I'll get the covers put on it and be ready to head back to the owner.